Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. If you've never been here before, you're watching Varietal Literature's YouTube page, and tonight we're talking about volcanoes and Christmas. Originally, the plan was just to talk about Christmas, to do some Icelandic tales from Christmas, but alas, it's been an exciting month for volcanoes, or I guess in particular the last couple of days, and I wanted to tell some tales about those volcanoes. Now, with that in mind, I'm just going to make an adjustment here. You guys in chat are going to have to tell me if the sound's a bit messed up or too loud or unbalanced or something, because definitely the laptop saga continues, and that means just the way sound mixes on this is a bit different. So let me know if there's any issues, if something is too loud. Just says you're really close. Yeah, I can see that. I'm just going to adjust that now. There we go. Okay. So, we're going to be looking at tales from Iceland tonight. And in our experiences of doing that, of looking at tales from Iceland, we're going to start off with a tale that is not about Christmas, but is about a volcano. Because if you are unaware, there is a rather large eruption going on right now in Iceland. And that's not terribly unusual, but this is one of the largest ones they've had in a long time. So, I just wanted to say a little bit on that and tell you a folklore tale. If you don't want to listen to any of this, by the way, if you're like, just get me to the tales and you're not watching this live, down in the description below, there will be timestamps, which you can click on, that'll take you to the beginning of whatever part of the stream you're interested in. We're actually going to be reading quite a few stories tonight. The first story, though, is the story about the volcano. We are then going to read, I believe it is 4 tales about Christmas, maybe 5. A couple are short, a couple are longer. We probably will go longer than an hour because I feel a little bad that last week we lost out on some Christmas tales because my laptop cooked itself. Now, speaking of laptop, here's my overall warning for the stream. This stream is far more demanding than the Thursday stream, which went pretty smoothly on this very old laptop that I am currently using. But that does mean if at some point the stream just ends mid-story, there's not really much I can do about it. It just means it crashed and ran out of RAM, which is entirely possible because I have only 8 gigs of DDR3 RAM on this thing, which is not an impressive amount of RAM for streaming and sound effects and all the other things. But I'm saying that not so much for sympathy, just to be aware that there is a very good chance it will crash. It very nearly already had, and we'll see how it goes. If you are here live, though, in the live chat, I see GS, Jumstore, and Zombie Wolf are here, and they are saying good evening, and good evening to all you folks. I think tonight's going to be a good one. We'll see how it goes. If it just dies on me, then I guess it won't be. If it does, though, come back Thursday, and I will say I'm sorry then. Okay. So, the last time a significant volcanic eruption occurred in Iceland was, of course, in 2011. I think the way most of us knew it, it was causing, all the smoke in the air was causing trouble for planes, and I do believe it did a bunch of damage to cattle and homes, as they often do. And so, obviously, with this much larger eruption going on in Iceland, I certainly hope that it doesn't do the same amount of damage. As I understand, it's fairly close to a fishery. I hope it doesn't, poison the water or anything like that, and they lose their supplies in that way. But I will say that most who live on islands, and most who sort of understand this stuff, have a respectful and somewhat bemused relationship with volcanoes, because islands are basically the tops of volcanoes for the most part. And so, while volcanoes provide a hardship, as they are doing this week, they also provide life in the land you live on. And so, without a doubt, Icelandic people and most people who live on islands greet those great big bubbling beasts of volcanoes with melancholy tales rather than resentment. They are, in my opinion, the closest you get to facing what might be the divine or eldritch horrors, or however you want to contextualize that, because it is a force unstoppable, completely destructive, absolutely awe-inspiring to watch. You should see some of the videos of it. And completely beyond us, I guess, is maybe the way I'd put it. Now, the plan was to do Christmas stories, so I am going to be doing quite a few Christmas stories tonight, also from Iceland. Yeah, we're going to do a little bit on volcanoes first. But, you know, I do want to be clear that while I go into these, I yearn for people to be safe and to not lose everything they know. So I do hope that while it is a large fissure of spitting and bubbling stuff, that it stays in the remote areas. So, with that said, I do want to give a little context on Iceland. I think a lot of my viewership probably already knows it, but if you don't, it helps you understand the stories. Again, if you don't care, down in the description there will be timestamps. You can jump right ahead. So, Iceland is basically an island that serves as a midway point for those who would have wanted to sail from northwestern Europe to North America, and indeed that's pretty much how it served historically. It pretty much lines up between roughly speaking, where the Nords would have occupied and where eastern Canada, or what we call Canada now, it certainly wasn't then, is. And as a result, the Icelandic people are a branch off the Nord tree that was all the folks willing to get into a boat, sail out of view of land onto a frozen ocean with nothing in front of them but sea. And that is terrifying. And they not only did that to get to Iceland, they then did it and got to Greenland. And then from Greenland, they decided to keep going all the way to Canada, ending up in Newfoundland and being, to my knowledge, the first Europeans to ever lay foot in North America, which again was not called North America at that point and arguably still shouldn't be. They referred to this area, I live in Canada if you don't know, as Vinland, because apparently we had a hell of a lot of grapes and they could make great wine with it. It's wineland. We don't know too much about it. It comes up apparently in some of the epic poems from the era, but again, Viking culture and Nordic culture was largely oral, so it's hard to know exactly what happened. But if you do want to, the first physical evidence we found that they made it here is in Newfoundland, called Lance au Meadow, which is this little meadow where we found some evidence of a settlement. Now, with that said, that was, I think, 11th or 10th century. So that's a very long time ago. That's pre-Columbus and all of that. But I'm telling you all of this because what you need to understand about these tales is they were tales that were written and passed down by people who were made a bit different, who were tough, who were in very rough survival situations as just a way of life. They sailed a frozen ocean blind, wound up on a volcanic plateau, made a home there. They're cut different. And the stories I think really are touched with that flavor of the wild frontier. This is a roundabout way of me saying, content warning, there's some brutality in these stories. These are not really tales of moral heroes as we might understand them. They are of their own morality of the time, but they're more just tales of those who were strong enough to persevere and survive and exact their will on the world. But you will also see in here that they take a lot of value from community and family because, of course, no one can survive on their own, especially in conditions like rustic old Iceland would have been. So the point is, content warning. It's nothing too graphic, but there is some just random murders in here, some of which are pretty cold-hearted, done by the supposed hero. As per usual, these streams are not necessarily for kids. I don't go out of my way to exclude kids, but I also don't go out of my way to include them. So, with that said, Get ourselves some cold wind. And let's talk about a volcano they call Katla. Unfortunately, this has no way of jumping to things other than find, so finding stories will always take a minute tonight. Now, one note before I go into this, for those who don't jump ahead to the beginning of the story, get to know this fun fact. When I was researching, trying to figure out what stories about volcanoes are worth trying to track down collected versions of, Katla was the one that came up. But I don't know if it's something about the English translation or if it's just a different version. I suspect it might be the English translation. There is a key difference in the version that was given to me by trustworthy Icelandic folklore sites and the version I was able to find that I could read. And that is, in this version, there is magical shoes. But apparently in the original version, it's magical underwear, or what they would call pants. So keep that in mind. I will read it as it's written, but it's very likely that this originally was about magical underpants. And a volcano. This story is called Katla, after the volcano that still exists in Iceland, that erupted in 2011, not the one that is erupting this week. And it comes to us from the book Icelandic Legends, which is a volume 1 specifically, which is a collection by Jon Arnesen. Once it happened that the abbot of the monastery of Tikovo had a housekeeper whose name was Katla. And she was an evil-minded and hot-tempered woman. She possessed a pair of shoes whose peculiarity was that whoever put them on was never tired of running. Everybody was afraid of Katla's bad disposition and fierce temper, even the abbot himself. And if Google translates to be trusted, her name means kettle, which makes sense here, as in a boiling kettle. Now the herdsman of the monastery farm, whose name was Bardi, was often dreadfully ill-treated by her, particularly if he had a chance to lose any of the ewes. One day in autumn, the abbot and his housekeeper went to a wedding, leaving orders with Bardi to arrive in the sheep and milk them before they came home, to drive in, rather. But unhappily, when the time came, the herdsman could not find all the ewes. So he went into the house, put on Katla's magic shoes, and sallied out in search of those stray sheep. He had a long way to run before he discovered them, but felt no fatigue, so drove all the flock in quite briskly. And when Katla returned, she immediately perceived that the herdsman had been using her shoes. So she took him and drowned him in a large tub full of curds. Other translations, a kind of acid that they used for preserving food. Hard to say which one would have been accurate. Nobody knew what had become of the man, and as the winter went on and the curds in the tub sank lower and lower, Katla was heard to say these words to herself: "Soon will the waves of milk break upon the footsoles of Barty." Shortly after this, dreading that the murder should be found out, that she should be condemned to death, she took her magic shoes and ran from the monastery to a great ice mountain, into a rift of which she leaped and was never seen again. However, as soon as she had disappeared, a fearful eruption took place from the mountain, and the lava rolled down and destroyed the monastery at which she had lived. People declared that her witchcraft had been the cause of this, and called the crater under the mountain the Rift of Katla. A couple of things that I learned in my research. It took me a bit to find a solid version of the story that I could use. Some say that there are versions of it where she boils a river, or somehow that causes a river to flood and wash away the monastery. And the other thing that this story doesn't seem to do, which seems to make the most sense to me, is that they say that it was something about her magical underwear that caused it to be such a ferocious eruption. And of course, this is particularly meaningful and famous, by the way, tale of a volcano, because Katla, the volcano, erupts roughly every 40 to 80 years, as I understand it, for quite a long time. So it is likely that it occurred within someone's lifetime when they would tell this tale. But there you go. There is a piece of folklore about an Icelandic volcano. And there are more pieces of Icelandic lore. I actually had tabs open and I was going to show you some of the little bits and pieces, and I did not have enough RAM to have those tabs open and run what I'm running right now. So I'm just going to tell you briefly from memory. They're mostly Icelandic tourism sites, like for bus lines and stuff. But one thing is, there's another volcano named Hekla, I believe, which was believed to be the entrance to hell. And it was quite high up, and so nobody climbed up there, and it was quite a while until somebody actually went up and checked and saw it wasn't hell. And there are some tales that I think our other stories might be similar characters or similar versions of. The only other one that I think I really wished I could have found, but I couldn't find the original version of, was the original collected version, I should say. There's no original versions of folklore. Was one that was also about Katla that involves a woman who gets trapped by the eruption of Katla and is just spontaneously becomes pregnant, and the child is thought to be like a changeling from the Elves, which are a bit different than our normal elves here. And apparently in some versions of the story, when it's born, it then kills the mother. I was trying to find that version, but I couldn't find it. Okay. But now let's move to our more typical programming. So if you were just here for the volcano, we're going to primarily focus on other trolls like Katla, who I guess wasn't a troll. She's more like a sorceress or something like that. But figures of malice, let's say, that do live in mountains and hills and so on, but are mostly based around Christmas, because of course we are in the weeks of Christmas. Now, one thing I do want to add here, this book makes a lot of reference to Christmas. I want you to keep in mind that if some of these tales are very old, likely find their roots over 1,000 years ago. And so when they say Christmas and when they say priest, you'll see a lot of priests in here that can cast spells. Well, it's true that sometimes it is just about priests and stuff. It's not like Iceland was not visited by missionaries and so on. They're more referring to solstice and what we call, I guess, the 12 days of Christmas, but what was effectively a midwinter party for, well, Thor and Odin and things like that. So a lot of this stuff takes place around midwinter, but the book, because it is translated for a modern audience, refers to that as things like Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Just keep that in mind. They don't quite mean Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. I think the solstice they celebrated is actually a little off what actual solstice was by like a day or something, if you're that picky about it. Okay, I'm gonna have a drink of water, and then we are going to learn about Gellivör. Oh, Tammy's here. Hello, Tammy. And Janera's here. Hello, Janera. Very good to see you, folks. Our next tale is a bit of a longer one about, well, a thing named Gellivör. It also comes to us from Icelandic Legends by Jon Arnarsson. Near the end of the Roman Catholic times, a certain married couple lived on a farm named Katla. Situated on a firth in the east part of the country, the farmer was well-to-do and wealthy in sheep and cattle. It was commonly reported that a female troll lived on the south side of the firth, who was supposed to be mild and not given to mischief. And if I could pause for a moment, Icelandic trolls are... Troll really means giant here. They're giants. They do carry the traits of what modern versions of trolls we have. But one thing you should know is that a major source of inspiration for Lord of the Rings folklore references is specifically Icelandic. So if you've seen those, they're very much like those. Now, one Christmas Eve, after dark, the farmer went out, but never returned again, and all search for him was in vain. After the man's disappearance, one of the servants took management of the farm, but was lost in the same manner after dark on the Christmas Eve following. After this, the widow of the farmer determined to remove all her goods from the house and live elsewhere for the winter, leaving only the sheep and herds under the charge of shepherds, and returning to pass the summer there. And as soon as the winter approached, she made preparations for leaving Katla until the next spring, and set the herdsmen to take control of the sheep and cattle and feed them during the cold season. For home use, she always kept 4 cows, one of which just had a calf. And for those who are not familiar with the implications of that, before we gave cows a lot of hormones and stuff to make this all the way, it means that cow's mother would be giving milk for about a year at least. 2 days before her intended departure, a woman came to her in her dreams. She was dressed in an old-fashioned dress of poor appearance. The stranger addressed her with these words: "Your cow has just calved, and I have no hope of getting nourishment for my children unless you will every day, when you deal out the rations, put a share for me in the jug in the dairy. I know that your intention is to move another farm in 2 days, as you dare not live over here for Christmas, for you know not what has become of your husband and of the servant and the last 2 Christmas Eves. But I must tell you that a female troll lives in the opposite mountains, herself of mild temper, but who 2 years ago had a child of such curious appetite and disposition that she was forced to provide fresh human flesh for it each Christmas. However, if you will do willingly for me what I have asked you to do, I will give you good advice as to how you may get rid of the troll from this neighborhood." With these words, the woman vanished. When the widow awoke, she remembered her dream, and getting up, went to the dairy, where she filled a wooden jug with new milk and placed it on the appointed spot. No sooner had she done so than it disappeared. The next evening the jug stood again in the same place, and so matters went on till Christmas. On Christmas Eve she dreamt again that the woman came to her with a friendly salutation and said, "Surely you are not inquisitive, for you have not yet asked to whom you give milk every day. I will tell you.
I am an elf woman, and living in the little hill near your house. You have treated me all well through the winter, but henceforth I will ask you no more for milk, as my cow had yesterday a calf. And now you must accept the little gift which you will find on the shelf, where you have been accustomed to place the jug for me, and I intend also to deliver you from the danger which awaits you tomorrow night. At midnight you will awake and feel yourself irresistibly urged to go out, as if something attracted you. Do not struggle against it, but get up and leave the house. Outside the door you will find a giantess standing, who will seize you and carry you in her arms across your grass field, stride over the river, and make off with you in the direction of the mountains in which she lives. And when she has carried you all the way up from the river, you must cry, "What did I hear then?" And she will immediately ask you, "What did you hear?" And you must answer, "I heard someone cry, 'Mama Gellivör, Mama Gellivör,' which she will think very extraordinary, for she knows that no mortal ever yet heard her name. She will say, 'Oh, I suppose it is that naughty child of mine,' and she will put you down and run to the mountains. But in the meantime, while she is engaged with you, I will be in the mountains, and I will thump and pinch her child without mercy. Directly she has left you, turn your back upon the mountain and run as fast as you possibly can towards the nearest farm along the riverbanks. And when the troll comes back and overtakes you, she will say, 'Why did you not stand still, you wretch?' and will take you again in her arms and stride away with you. As soon as you have gone a little way, you must cry again, 'What did I hear then?' And she will ask, as at first, 'What did you hear?' Then you shall reply, 'I thought I heard someone calling, Mama Gellivör, Mama Gellivör,' on which she will fling you down as before and run towards the mountain. And now you must make all speed to reach the nearest church before she can catch you again, for if she succeeds in doing so, she will treat you horribly in her fury at finding that I have pinched and thumped her child to death. If, however, you fail in getting to the church in time, I will help you."
When after this dream the widow awoke, the day had dawned, and so she got up and went to the shelf upon which the jug was wont to stand. And here she found a large bundle which contained a handsome dress and girdle and a cap, all beautifully embroidered. Now it was about midnight on Christmas Day, when all the rest of the farm people were asleep. The widow felt an irresistible desire to go out, as the elf woman had warned her, and she did so. And directly she passed the threshold, she felt herself seized and lifted high in the air by a gigantic troll, who stalked off with her over the river towards the mountains. Everything turned out exactly as the elf in the dream had foretold, until the giantess flung her down her burden for the second time, and the widow made speed to reach the church. And on the way it seemed to her as if someone took hold of her arms and helped her along, though unseen.
and suddenly she heard the sound of a tremendous land ship on the Troll's Mountain turning round, saw in the clear moonlight the giantess striding fiercely towards her over the morasses, and at this sight she would have fainted with fear had she not felt herself lifted from the ground and hurried through the air into the church, the door of which closed immediately behind her. And it happened that the priests were about to celebrate early Mass, and all the people were assembled directly. There is some beautiful pictures in here, but I don't really have a reasonable way to show them. There we go. Directly she came to the church, and the bells began to ring, and the congregation heard the sound of some heavy fall outside, like footfall. Looking from one of the windows, they saw the troll hurry away from the noise of the bells, and in her flight stumble over the wall of the churchyard, part of which fell. Then the troll said to it, "Never stand again," and hurrying away took up her abode in another mountain beyond the confines of the parish of Katla. Now this story comes with another story, much shorter, but a little more Christmassy, I think. Here is something more about Gellivör. A mountain in the south of the country, called Gellivör, was haunted by this troll, who had now become mischievous as to be impassable. For 2 years things went on thus, and it happened at this time that the inhabitants of Tingarassil, almost certainly said that wrong, I did practice, it didn't ever sound right, became confused in their computation of dates and forgot when exactly Christmas Day fell. In their difficulty, they determined that their only chance was to send a bishop to Skald and ask him to put them right again. And they chose as their messenger a certain bold and active man named Unelfed. On the way to Skald, this Unelfed passed late in the day over the mountain Valbjörg, and beyond being willing to linger there, went on his way as quickly as possible. When twilight had fallen, he saw that great giantess standing in the way before him, who addressed him with these words: "Are you going south, or far mouth? Wry mouth, I would fain warn you, go home again. Blow your nose, wry face, and return with shame to your own place." Then he replied, "O troll sitting on Blafel, all hail, may you fare well." To which she replied, "Of old few greeted me so well. Dearest darling, fare thee well," and let him pass without molesting him. Unelfed went on to Skald, where the bishop solved his difficulty immediately for him. And on his way home, he passed over Valbjörg. He met again with the troll, who did not appear so formidable as she had done the first time. She gave him a book, which he looked at and found to be a troll almanac. And in giving him this calendar, she said, "If Christ, son of Mary, has done as much for us trolls as you declare that he has done for you human beings, we should scarcely have been so ungrateful as to forget the date of his birthday." Then Unelfed, whose powers of gratitude certainly do seem to have been rather limited, said to her, "Look eastward. Who rides on a white horse?" Whereupon the troll turned around, and as she saw nothing but daybreak, was instantly turned to stone. And so Unelfed went home rejoicing. GS says, "Death by pinching and thumping." I do wonder what they mean by pinching here, because I feel like something got censored. Okay.
A lot of chat. Zombie Wolf says Scandinavian trolls are actually quite small, but Nordic trolls were huge. I didn't know that about Scandinavian trolls. I don't think I've actually read any Scandinavian lore. Maybe I did years ago. It's amazing how different folklore can be when you're so close to each other. Yeah, it is really quite startling, because I think for a lot of people, Scandinavia and Nordic is, at least on a surface level, looks very similar, and you would assume it has a lot in common. Also, things that don't have anything else in common will have weird things in common. Like, a lot of German accounts of trolls hold a lot of similarities to Nordic trolls. And we were talking about a video game, which is very cool, but I'm not going to engage with it, just because I'm going to stay on track with what I'm doing. But you guys carry on. To which I will move on to our next story. Our next story is quite short. It's not really a story, but it's basically, in my opinion, an Icelandic Krampus. And since I can't find any Krampus stories, we'll have to do with what is a fairly insane description. Our next story is called Gryla, and it also comes to us from Icelandic Legends by Jon Arnarsson in his first volume, as I believe. There's like 6 versions of this, and they all seem to have slightly different selections, despite supposedly being the same book. So, hopefully, you can find it if you need to. This is a very short, not so much story as description of a character that comes out around Christmas. Now, we cannot conclude our stories of trolls without giving a description of Gryla, a bugbear used to frighten children in quiet, which is almost horrible enough to frighten them to death. Gryla had 300 heads, 6 eyes each in each head. Somebody do the math on that. Besides 2 livid and ghostly blue eyes at the back of each neck. So really 8 eyes on each head. She had goat horns, and her ears were so long as to hang down to her shoulders at one end, and at the other to join the ends of her 300 noses. On each forehead was a tuft of hair, and on each chin a tangled and filthy beard. Her teeth were like burnt lava. To each thigh she had bound a sack in which she used to carry naughty children. And she had moreover hooves like a horse. Besides all this, she had 15 tails, and on each tail 100 bags of skin. Pause to let everyone wonder what that might mean. Every one of which bags would hold 20 children. Gryla had a husband named Lapludi, a scarecrow, and they had 20 children. And in addition to these 20 children, they had 13 more, whom Gryla is reported to have borne before she was married to the scarecrow, called Christmas men, as they were supposed to come to human abodes about Christmas time and take away the naughty children. More is told about all these trolls, which is not worth repeating, which is Jon Arnarsson's commentary at the end there. GS says that would certainly terrify children. So, hey, if you're looking to scar your children with historically accurate and interesting new ways, might I recommend telling them tales about Gryla, the 300-headed, 2,400-eyed creature, 2 of which are blue and on the back of their neck, with skin bags on their tail that hold squirming bad children. GS says Christmas men, aka the Grinch. All right. Our next story is a bit of a longer one. It is. I will be curious how people feel about it. I found myself like simultaneously engaged, but also a little horrified by it. It is also technically a story about Christmas. I think the less I say, the better. Our next story is called Valbjörg, the Unelfed. If you're wondering, what does it mean to be unelfed? Well, that's what the story's about. It also comes to us from Icelandic Legends, Volume 1 by Jan Arnesen. Now, in the East Country, not far from the Lakes of Wool, as they are called, lived a certain farmer who had a son named Gellivör. It happened one year that this peasant had lost all his sheep upon the mountain, and as his flocks were nearly all that he had to depend upon for his livelihood, had taken the loss very much to heart, and sent 4 or 5 men in succession to search far and near through hill and valley. There's some lovely art of him standing on a cliff, waving a cane in the air with a woman at his side. For the missing sheep, which could not, in the short time that had passed since they were lost sight of, have strayed very far, but to the farmer's great distress, neither sheep nor shepherds ever came to light again. Now one fine day, Gellivör, who was a sturdy fellow, and brave to boot, said to his father, "My father, I will go and try my luck in searching for your lost servants and flocks. Give me Godspeed." While his parents were mightily against this. "For," as said they, "we would rather lose 1,000 servants and 1,000 flocks than our son." Which I imagine most parents would say. But Gellivör laughed at their fears and said, "So he would, and go he must." Accordingly, go he did, having asked the blessing of his parents. Over hill and through valley he went, just as he heard his father bid the shepherds go. But though he looked far and near, and though he toiled himself well weary, nothing did he see of either men or sheep. And at last he came to some large lakes, round the shores of which lay vast masses of wool spread out for drying, and on the other side of these lay some pasture lands of the richest grass, upon which he saw flocks grazing and shepherds watching them. Thinking at once that they must be the sheep that had been lost, and of which he was in search of, he made his way with all speed towards them. But he'd scarcely gone near enough to count them, when a woman of handsome presence walked up to him and saluted him kindly. When he had returned her greeting, he asked her what she was called. "I am called," she said, "Vandran or Valbjörg, which you please, and am glad to see you here. Welcome you, friend Gellivör." "Surely I've never seen you before," replied he. "How then do you know my name?" Music's a little loud here. The woman answered, "I know well both you and your father Andres. And what is more, I know that you are now in search of his missing flocks and herdsmen. To tell you the truth, it was I that both lost your father his sheep and killed his shepherds.
And you, since you have been foolhardy enough to wander on about the same errand, shall lose your life in the same way as the others have done, if you will not agree better than they to what I ask you.
What is your will? Said Sugar. Tell me what you wish to do.
Then she said, My will is that you stay here and live with me, and never try to escape.
But, replied Shigoda again, I must know first to what manner of woman I pledge myself, and if you refuse to tell me, then I will rather die, for I know not fear, then say you, yeah? Upon which this she answered,
I am one of the race of Elves, and I dwell in yonder hillock.
Then Shigoda consented to live with her, on condition that she would firstly let him build a house for himself after his own manner, and secondly that she would let his father know that he still lived and did well, and lastly that she would restore, safe and sound, his father's flocks, and all these things she promised to do, and bade Shigoda to follow him. Pretty well content with the bargain he had made, and not altogether cold to Valbjörg's charms, he followed her till they came to the hillock, into which they entered through a door of carved wood. As Shigoda was looking around him and admiring the beauty of the rooms and the traces of wealth which they contained, Valbjörg said to him,
2 years I have lived here quite alone, since I lost my parents, and weary and lonely have I been. And I have been unwilling to dwell with one of my own race, as my father prophesied, that I should have children by a human being. Therefore, when the herdsmen came here to look after the lost flocks, I asked them to stay with me and comfort me. And when each refused, I slew them by magic art. But I am well pleased, Shigoda, that your heart was inclined towards me, as now my father's words will be accomplished.
So Shigoda built himself a hut close to the hillock and lived with Valbjörg. And though at first he found his new life irksome to him and his soul yearned for home, yet after a short time he became accustomed to everything about him, and his love for Valbjörg increased. One morning, when Andre, his father, rose from sleep and looked forth from the farm, he saw the flock of sheep which he had lost grazing in the home field, and on going to count them, he found that not one was missing. Pardon me? Much rejoiced at this, he thought that Shigoda, perhaps the missing shepherds, had come back during the night and were now in the family room, but no, nothing had either been seen or heard of them, and Andres was constrained to send out 20 of his neighbors to search for them. All in vain, however. For search as they would, far and near, high and low, over hill and through valley, not a trace was to be found of the lost men, and when they all came back to the farm with this very bad news, the farmer took it so much to heart that he fell ill and kept to his bed. Now it happened one night, some little time after this, that Andreas had a dream in which he saw a woman of handsome presence come to him, who said,
"Fear not, my friend, for your son's life. He is well and lives happily with me, who am an elf woman. It was I who stole your sheep, but your son made me restore them.
Upon this she left him, and he woke full of joy that his son was still alive, and in the morning arose again, restored to health by these happy tidings, and went about among his servants, attending to the management of the farm as he had done before the illness smote him. Now 3 years went by, and still nothing was heard of Sigurdur. In the autumn of the 3rd year, however, the farmer Andreas had a dream in which his son came to him, and after he had saluted him, said, "Come, my father, I entreat you on Christmas Eve to the lakes of wool. Bring with you priest Erker, for by the shores of the lake you'll see my house standing, and you will find the door thrown open. Come into the house yourself, but bid Erker to stand in the entrance and grasp tightly the woman who shall run out from the family room as if to leave the house. Oh no, on no account must he let her go, or do or say what she will, as on his holding her fast depends my safety and happiness. If she escapes him that Christmas Eve, you will never see me more." And with these words he vanished, and Andreas woke. And if I could dream walk, these are the kinds of things I would say to total strangers. After pondering a while over this dream, which he felt to be no idle fancy, but well fraught with meaning, he determined to do as Sigurdur had bidden him, and rising went forth to Erker's house to take counsel with him thereupon. And when the priest had heard the dream, he said to the farmer, "My friend, this but confirms what I have always thought, namely, that the Elves withhold your son from you, and right willingly will I aid you in this matter, whatever turn it may take." Accordingly, in due time, Andreas and Erker addressed themselves to their journey, and on Christmas Eve exactly arrived at the shores of the lakes of wool, and they at once saw Sigurdur's house. Going up to it, found the door thrown open. And when he entered the family room, he saw by light of candle that was burning there his son Sigurdur carding wool upon a wooden chest. And near him was a bed on which sat a woman with a child in her arms, and another child lying in a cradle before her feet. And so the farmer saluted them, saying, "God be here." No sooner were the words out of his mouth than the woman, flinging down the child she held in her arms, and leaping over the cradle which lay at her feet, ran hastily from the family room, made as if she would leave the house. But Erker, the priest who stood in the doorway, was too quick for her, seizing her in his arms, and held her fast. And that was no easy matter, for she struggled so that the priest who had the strength of 2 men, and who was moreover skilled in wrestling and manly arts, had much ado to resist her. And when they heard the noise, Sigurdur and his father went out from the family room, and taking the light with them, helped the priest to bring her back into the house, and lay her down on the bed. After Erker had laid his hand gently upon her, she became quieter, and he watched over her all that night. From time to time she fainted, and when she came to her senses, wept till it made the blood of all who heard her run cold. And she entreated the priest to let her go, free, by all he loved best. But he was not to be moved from his firm, though gentle watch and ward. At last, after day had broken, Sigurdur and his father collected all the house wealth together, packed it on horses, and set forth, taking the priest, Valbjörg, and the children with them, and driving the flocks before them. And when they left the hut and the mound a little way behind them, Sigurdur turned around and cast a spell over the place, which is the reason why nobody can find it. Now the weather being fine and the nights bright and calm, the whole company traveled without resting till they came to Andreas' farm. And the priest Urker dwelt with them a week, trying through much watching and prayer to tame the savage temper of Valbjörg. But at the end of that time, Sigurdur and his father thought best that he should take the woman to his own house for the remainder of the winter, which he did. And before the springtime, he had quite subdued her elfin nature. In the meantime, Sigurdur took care of his 2 children at the farm, and his flocks wandered about the hills, taking care of themselves and trusting to kind neighbors. In spring, Erkar joined Sigurdur and Valbjörg in marriage, and a very loving and happy couple they were. And now that all Valbjörg's elfin nature had left her, so they dwelt to a good age in the parish of which the worthy Erkar was priest, and Valbjörg was much loved and looked up to as a Christian woman and a good housewife. 4 children they had, whose descendants may no doubt be found in the east of Iceland by anybody who cares to look for them. You know, it is interesting because I think I was rooting for her. GS says he doesn't dare leave lest he be sloon. Yeah. And then he left anyways and wasn't. And some conversation about book fairs, which are fun. And Spanish hot chocolate, which is better than most hot chocolates anyways. I won't say all. I think the best hot chocolate I ever had is we have quite a bit of German expatriates in Vancouver for whatever reason. Enough to justify what is called the German Christmas market, which is, I'm sure, borderline just a tacky understanding of German, but it does have some pretty genuine German stuff there. And one of the things it has is German hot chocolate, which is just, as far as I can tell, a cup of hot cream that you melt just a bunch of dark chocolate into. It is delicious, but as you're drinking it, you wonder, should I be doing this? Okay. We have one medium-length story and then one short and very funny little story about Christmas left. And I gotta say, I was having a hard time choosing this time because there just are so many stories in Icelandic folklore about there we go. You're gonna make me do this the hard way, are you? Okay. There are so many stories in Icelandic folklore about Christmas time, which is why it's a shame that we didn't have last week as well. Tammy says, "Oh, really? That sounds really tasty." It was. It was. I mean, if there's one thing Germans are quite good at, there's a lot of cooking that Germans are quite good at, but if there's one thing that they're like kind of iconic for, it's chocolate stuff. Zombie Wolf says, on the topic of chocolate, what's everyone's preference? Milk, dark, white, or ruby? I'm not familiar with ruby, but dark. I'm a dark chocolate person. Okay. Darker the better. I once had like a 95% or 99% bar that was unsweetened, and I don't know why I like it. Because like if somebody said to me, "This tastes like dirt," I'd be like, "Yeah, no, but good dirt." Okay. Our second to last story, and our last sort of substantial story, our very last story, is quite short and a bit silly, is called The Manservant and the Water Elves. And it follows a format that comes up a lot in Nordic myth. It comes up a lot in Christmas time myths in Iceland, which is, it concerns this idea of spirits eating in unwelcome places around Christmas time. Genera says 90% is for baking. If you have that strong blood, 99% cocoa, barely hanging together, just cocoa powder. Zombie Wolf says Ruby is a new kind of chocolate. It's pink in color and tastes similar to white chocolate, but a bit more tangy. White chocolate I don't hate as much as other people, but it's got to be pretty good. But I would definitely never prefer it. Okay. There we go. Okay. This story is called The Manservant and the Water Elves, and it also comes to us from Icelandic Legends, the Jon Arneson collection. Content warning and spoiler warning. So if people really want a spoiler, I'm going to hold up my finger. When I drop my finger, the spoiler will be ended. But content warning, a dog gets killed. It's just a sentence in the later half, but just so you know. In a large house, where all the chief rooms were paneled, there lived once upon a time a farmer whose ill fate it was that every servant of this that was left alone to guard the house on the night of Christmas Eve, while the rest of the family went to church, was found dead when the family returned home. As soon as the report of this was spread abroad, the farmer had the greatest difficulty in procuring servants who would consent to watch alone in the house on that night, until at last one day a man, a strong fellow, offered him his services to sit up alone and guard the house. The farmer told him what fate awaited him for his rashness, but the man despised such fear and persisted in his determination. On Christmas Eve, when the farmer and all his family, except the new manservant who were preparing for church, the farmer said to him, "Come with us to church. I cannot leave you here to die." But the other replied, "I intend to stay here, for it would be unwise in you to leave your house unprotected, and besides, the cattle and sheep must have their food at the proper time." "Never mind the beast," answered the farmer. "Do not be so rash as to remain in the house this night, for whenever we have returned from church on this night, we've always found every living thing in the house dead, with all its bones broken." The man was not to be persuaded, as he considered all these fears beneath his notice. So the farmer and the rest of the servants, they went away and left him behind alone in that dark house. And soon he was by himself. He began to consider how to guard against anything that might occur, for a dread had stolen over him, in spite of his courage, that something strange was about to take place. At last he thought that the best thing to do was to first of all light up the family room, and then to find some place in which to hide himself. And as soon as he had lighted all the candles, he moved 2 planks out of the wainscot at the end of the room, and creeping into the space between it and the wall, restored the planks to their places so that he could see plainly into the room and yet avoid being discovered himself. He had scarcely finished concealing himself when 2 fierce and strange-looking men entered the room and began to look about. One of them said, "I smell a human being." "No," replied the other. "There's no human being here." And then they took a candle and continued their search until they found, last warning on this, until they found the man's dog asleep under one of the beds. And so they took it up and, having dashed it on the ground till every bone in its body was broken, hurled it from them. And when the manservant saw this, he congratulated himself on not having fallen into their hands. Suddenly the room was filled with people who were laden with tables, silver, claws, and all which they spread out, having done so, sat down to a rich supper, which they had also brought with them, and they feasted noisily, and spent the remainder of the night drinking and dancing. But two of them were appointed to keep guard in order to give the company due warning of the approach of either anybody or of the day. And 3 times they went out, always returning with the news that they saw neither the approach of any human being, nor yet the break of day. But when the manservant suspected the night to be pretty far spent, he made his move. He jumped from his place of concealment into the room, and clashing the 2 planks together with as much noise as he could make, he shouted like a madman, "The day! The day! The day!" On these words, the whole company rose scared from their seats and rushed headlong out, leaving behind them not only their tables and all their silver dishes, but even the very clothes they had taken off for ease in dancing. And in the hurry of flight, many were wounded and trodden underfoot until dead. And while the rest ran into the darkness, the manservant after them, clapping the planks together and shrieking, "The day! The day! The day!" until they came to a large lake, into which the whole party plunged headlong and disappeared. And from this the man knew them to be water elves. Then he returned home and gathered the corpses of the elves who had been killed in the flight, killed all the wounded ones, and making a great heap of them all, burned them. And when he had finished this task, he cleaned up the house, took possession of all the treasures the elves had left behind. And on the farmer's return, his servant told him all that had occurred and showed him the spoils. The farmer praised him for a brave fellow and congratulated him on having escaped with his life. The man gave him half the treasures of the elves, and ever afterwards prospered exceedingly. This was the last visit the water elves ever paid to that house. Tammy's having some buffering issues. I am sorry to hear that, Tammy. That's okay. The video doesn't go anywhere. People are talking about how messed up this is. Part of I'm a little desensitized to it, I suppose, because they just sort of regard life differently, the elves and spirits, and it's not unusual for them to just brutally kill someone and then go dancing and stuff like that. But what a scene, a bunch of naked elves just partying all night. Now we have one more story left. It's sort of more a description, a legend. And I want to ask how many people will be doing this on Christmas Eve. Let me set the right mood. Now our very last tale tonight is called The Crossways, and it also comes to us from Icelandic Legends by Jon Arnarsson. It is supposed that among the hills there are certain crossroads, from the center of which you can see 4 churches, one at the end of each road. If you sit at the crossings of these roads on Christmas Eve, or as others say, on New Year's Eve, elves come from every direction, and they cluster around you and ask you, with all sorts of blandishments and fair promises, to go with them. But you must continue silent. And then they bring to you rarities and delicacies of every description, gold, silver, precious stones, meat, and wines, of which they beg you to accept. But you must neither move a limb nor accept a single thing they offer you. If you get so far as this without speaking, elf woman will come to you in the likeness of your mother, your sister, or any other relation, and beg you to come with them, using every art and entreaty. But beware you neither move nor speak. And if you can continue to keep silent and motionless all the night until you see the first streak of dawn, then start up and cry loud, "Praise be to God, his daylight filleth the heavens." And as soon as you have said this, the elves will leave you, and with you all the wealth they have used to entice you, which will now be yours. But should you either answer or accept their offers, you will from that moment become mad. Totally mad. And in fact, let me tell you a tale of that. On the night of one Christmas Eve, a man named Fusi went out to the crossroads and managed to resist all the entreaties and proffers of the elves until, well, everyone has their price, and one of them offered him a large lump of mutton suet and begged him to take a bite of it. So that's basically sheep fat. Fusi who had up to this time gallantly resisted all such offers as gold and silver and diamonds, and such filthy lucre, could hold out no longer, and crying, "Seldom have I refused a bite of mutton suet," and went immediately mad. And that is the end of my Christmas tales for this year. I do have translator's notes, but I knew I would be going too long today, so we'll have to do that in the new year. Sometimes if I get bored, I do pre-recorded stuff and throw it up in the week I take off for Christmas, but I don't know if that's going to happen this year. We'll see. Jump Store says, anyone else thinking of the elves from Lord of the Rings getting blackout drunk and naked? I mean, it's not far off. Because these elves, that's one of the things. These elves are some of the only elves who are like full-size, beautiful people, which is more in line with how Tolkien conceives of his elves, because Tolkien is largely taking from Icelandic lore for that. Not so much in their personality exactly, though there is a bit of that. But normally elves are sort of smaller things or peculiar things, and you don't get elves per se in some of the other regions. You get a lot of like halder folk, which are sort of spirits, sort of elves. But they're more specifically elves in Iceland. Anyways, what mutton suet did him in? Zombie Wolf says, is this the last live stream till January? No, this is the last Fireside Fairytales till January. I will be here on Thursday. But not everyone who's watching me now watches that stream. And I know that because it gets like a third the views that this one does. So for those who only watch this stream, I will, that'll be it. In terms of stories. But as far as me with RPGs, we will have a playthrough of an RPG on Thursday. Really haven't decided what I want to do. There are like a few different options, and none of them are amazing me. There's like three versions of the tabletop RPGs that have that are just about writing a Hallmark movie, which I did watch some of them, but I don't know that I really have it in me to write that. So I don't know if I'm going to use that one or not. We'll see. We will definitely be doing more stuff from this particular book now that I've found this volume, because the volume that I had before that I, again, thought was both volumes had some stuff, but not as magical as I wanted. These ones are lovely and strange and so on. And I just want to, as I close out, in the chat, of the many tales that we've told now about events on Christmas Eve, or solstice if you want to look at it that way, and Christmas Day, which one would you pull a tradition from for your Christmas? Would you take your family out and sit at a crossroads all night? Well, somebody in a suit runs up to you and offers you mutton. Or perhaps you would have a tradition where you grab a friend and pin them down to the bed and whisper blessings to them from God. I'm curious what traditions you would pull that would embody these legendary tales of Christmas Eve, because that's all most celebrations are. We, put on a hat because we want to look like some troll or something, and according to a story that supposedly happened on that night. So I'm just curious what traditions people would pull from these very strange stories. Not strange objectively, strange to us. And for anybody who is not an attendee of my varietal show on Thursday, well, you have a wonderful season, however you choose to celebrate it. For me, it's Merry Christmas, and Happy Solstice, which I think is, I think it'll be Thursday, actually. And thank you so much, and season's greetings to Jumstore GS, Tammy Morelli, Zombie Wolf, Genera, and I think that's everybody. If it's not, give me hell. I should know better. I'll keep the fire warm for you all Christmas. You have yourself a good evening.